Good afternoon, everyone. Because our time has started, so we will start with our programming and hopefully Afghanistan will be able to join in soon. Unfortunately, they're having some internet issues in their city and they're trying to resolve it. As soon as it's resolved, they will be online and we'll take them as part of the conversation. To start off, I'd like to welcome everybody to the second session of Book Clubs Across Borders, where we are reading the book, The Crow Eaters by Bapsi Sidhwa today. This book is a very interesting book and we'd like to get into it much more as we progress into the programming. I would like to introduce our very special guest today. We have Kahina Robinson with us. Kahina Robinson is the Public Affairs Officer for the United States Consulate General Peshawar. She joined the US Department of State as a Foreign Service Officer in 2011. Her previous overseas tours include an assignment as the Cultural Affairs Officer in Niger and a consular tour in Brazil. In Washington, she served as the Public Diplomacy Advisor to the Special Envoys for Sudan and South Sudan, as a staff assistant in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, and as a watch officer, senior watch officer in Crisis Management Center. Prior to joining the State Department, she worked in the Poverty Reduction in Economics Management Network at the World Bank. She's a proud graduate of DC Public Schools. Kahina studied literary media arts at Duke Ellington School of the Arts before obtaining a BA in anthropology from Yale and a master's degree from Columbia. And Kahina speaks French and Portuguese. So Kahina, it is a great pleasure to have you with us. We also have Zishan, who's part of the US Consulate General Peshawar. And welcome to the both of you. We have our amazing students from the Rana Welfare Trust in Peshawar, and we will soon be joined by our students in Afghanistan. And so before we start, I thought it would be a good idea to have a brief summary of the book presented to everyone. And I have my colleague Aruj, who's going to give us a little summary of the book, and she will feed a few questions from the summary, which we will take from the students, and we will take it from there. Over to you, Aruj.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be connected with you. So I'm just going to give a brief gist of the story of The Crow Eaters, the book that we're discussing for this month. And The Crow Eaters is a book about, specifically about the Parsi community within British India, before Pakistan and India had become separate nations. And the book it traverses multiple decades, but it's between roughly the 1920s and the 1940s. And it is a story of this very, very dynamic, but also very particular Parsi family, which has traveled recently from Karachi to Lahore. And that's how the story begins. It begins on their journey in which they're coming into Lahore. Basically, it's the protagonist of the story really is Freddie Faridun Jangalwala, who is this person who's traveling with his mother, his children, his mother-in-law, his children, and his wife from Karachi to Lahore in search of new business opportunities. And he's opened this sort of a store. It's a wine shop. It's also, a grocery store sort of a place. The relationship is basically what happens behind the store in their house between his mother-in-law, him, and his wife, because they have this sort of a love-hate relationship going on, which usually goes towards hate. And and it's basically about their family dynamic and how they're coping with being a Parsi family in Lahore. So the Parsi community is in a minority in both Pakistan and India, and also in the world, because they're in very limited numbers. And so in Lahore at present, there are maybe 3 to 4 Parsi families. And at the time, there were maybe 20. And then the majority of the Parsi community lived in Karachi and Bombay. So in the story as well, the mother-in-law, for example, whose name is Jerbano, she is tied to Karachi and to Bombay repeatedly because of a lot of these Parsi symbols being in both those and not in Lahore. So it is also this story of giving up or giving away the symbols that tie you to your religion and to your heritage and to what you consider your identity. And the story traverses with Freddie growing older and his children growing up simultaneously. and of him trying to come to terms with a world in which he is no more going to be the patriarch, he is no more going to be the pragmatic entrepreneur that he is. And it shows you how his children take over and how he tries to still regain control by giving into superstition of all things. So going to a mystic and trying to overpower his mother-in-law, and then going to a Brahmin priest who is a Hindu Brahmin priest, but just because he wants to regain some form of spirituality, in order to understand how his children's futures will become. And that's how the story goes, and it ends with Freddie being in his last days. So him thinking that he is close to death, and he is talking to his children about how the world is changing, how partition of India and Pakistan is approaching, and what they need to do to carry on not only his legacy but also to survive in this ever-changing world. And that is the gist of the story. But what I would like to ask the students in Peshawar who have connected, yeah, so the students in Peshawar is what do you know about the Parsi community in Pakistan and in general as well? And what do you think, does the book do justice to introducing or, explaining the Parsi experience to you? Over to you, Peshawar.
We were actually very inquisitive about the Parsi community, and we're hoping that perhaps discussing it with Afghanistan, who are much more closer to the community, would help a lot and would help us understand if the elements were justified, which Bapsi Sidhwa had included in the book.
So could you talk about what you found intriguing in the book? What were these elements that you want to know more about?
One of the students do have a question about Parsi community, particularly about Zoroastrian religion, and
Assalamualaikum. My name is Savera. And what did the Parsi people worship? Answer, please.
All right. Thank you so much for that question. Zoroastrianism is one of the oldest religions in the world. They worship fire. They trace their origin to Persia, what is modern day Iran. And they traveled from Iran into that time subcontinent or United India. So you see a large number of the Zoroastrian population both in Bombay and Karachi because they are the coastal cities, and that is where they were able to find space for themselves. Like I explained, they basically worship fire and have a very old traditional heritage. And their practices and their community is very tight knit. They intermarry within their community, and when they moved to United India from Persia at that time, they made a promise to the king at that time, who gave them refuge here, that they would not convert any local communities into Zoroastrianism. And hence, that is the reason why in Pakistan, there is no conversion. But conversion does exist in Bombay, in the center of the Zoroastrian community. So whenever a Zoroastrian marries a non-Parsi, they are ousted from their community. There is no inclusion of new people into the community, but in order to remain true to the vow that they had made, they remain within their own community. And yeah, so this is the answer. Does that answer the question and the query that you had?
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much for answering that, but we actually have another question.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Reshma. What is a partial fernal place?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question? I didn't get it.
What is the partial fernal place?
Funeral place.
Funeral place. All right. So the Parsis, like I explained, are a very old religion, and they have some practices which are unique to them. They have a tower of death, which one of their tower of deaths is situated in Karachi. Their funeral practices are that they bathe the body, they lard the body with certain herbs, and then they leave it on the tower to be taken back to nature, because they believe that the human body is a sacred entity, and the spirit that lives inside the body is housed inside the body for a particular amount of time. And when the time is finished and the spirit leaves the body must go back to nature from where it came. So it naturally decomposes and is eaten off by different vultures. And this is part of their giving back to nature. So this is their funeral rites, or rites of passage, as they're known in Zoroastrian.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions from Peshawar? Because I have a question for you otherwise. Okay.
Question. What is the symbolic meaning of crow eaters? What is the symbolic meaning of crow eaters?
All right, that's a really good question, and I'm so glad you asked it. The book, The Crow Eaters, is symbolic to the community. The Parsi community is known as a community which talks a lot, and they had been nicknamed the crows. Like, they talk so much, yap, yap, yap. So Bapsi grew up in a time where she was, if you read a little about her story, her own story is very interesting. And I have a little something that I would like to share with you later on about her. An interview that we conducted with Bapsi when she was visiting Pakistan, and a snippet of it I have specially prepared to share with you, our audience. So she grew up with this term, the crows, and because she grew up with that term and she questioned it, and by nature she was very inquisitive, he took it as something that was negatively attached to the Parsi community, and she wanted to own it. She wanted to turn it into a positive, and she wrote the book that she wrote, which was pretty much like a biography of hers, not exactly, but it was greatly derived from her own personal experiences, things that she had encountered. So she took this term that the society had latched onto them and owned it, and turned it into something to get to know them. So the crow eaters are basically people who, there's a very interesting Urdu term for it, which we all have grown up with, ke kabe ka dimag kha ke aayi ho, which means like, you talk so much. I mean, so have you eaten the brain of a crow? So this is something that was kind of the magic that she wanted to weave into her narrative. Hence, she used the term the crow eaters to kind of denote her own presence as a community, and put it out there on the shelves for people who would calling them the crow eaters to get to know more about them. And as you have read the book is full of humor, of comedy. There are these incidences where she talks about her own life, her own childhood, her own adulthood, and how everything has a connotation of humor and drama attached to it.
Thank you.
It's me again. The thing that most of us were really curious about was if this was a real story. Could you go into what elements of this book were autobiographical? Because I read somewhere that it was a semi-autobiography by Babsi Silva. So what elements sort of related heavily with her life? Thank you.
Sure. So in order to answer that question, I would like to share something with you all, which would encourage you, which would kind of answer your question. And after watching what I am sharing with you, I'll come back to the question that you asked and get on a debate on that. So I'm just going to share my screen with you all.
My brother मुझसे 1 साल छोटे थे और वो मुझे because as a child I had polio and didn't go to school, सब मुझे थोड़ा retarded समझते थे, till I wrote the Crow Eaters. अब इत्तेफाक से ये हुआ, मेरे भाई आ रहे थे, मैं तो बिल्कुल प्राइवेसी में चुपचाप लिखती थी क्योंकि मेरा हस्बैंड का फैमिली बिजनेस था, मेरा भी फैमिली बिजनेस था, तो अगर पता चला किसी को कि मैं किताब लिख रही हूँ तो वो मजाक उड़ाते मेरी. Is it all right if I talk about it? जी. So they would jeer के वापसी ने क्या लिखना है, रोमांस लिखेगी, वो मजाक करते थे. So even my brother didn't know, but he vaguely suspected. अब एक दिन वो फैज साहब के साथ जहाज में बैठे थे in coming from Pindi to Lahore. And Javed Iqbal ने क्या किया था कि after my book was self-published, before it was launched, he tore off the back and front covers and gave it to all the writers he knew. तो उनमें से फैज साहब को भी दी. तो Faiz opened this ragged little book and he showed it to my brother and he said, ये कोई पारसी औरत ने लिखी है. तो बता सकते हो कौन है? So my brother opened the book and he said, I think my sister writes. And he read a little and he said, this is from my sister. So वो दोनों मेरे घर आ गए गुलबर्ग में. I used to live near the Gulbarg market at that time. And वो उन जमाने में तो खैर एक ही एयर कंडीशन होता था बेडरूम में. तो फैज साहब वहाँ आए. And he said, you've written this book? I said, yes. He said, it's a very good book, but it's a second class book. तो मैं कहा, अच्छा जी, thank you. He said, ये जो Narayan और वो अभी who wrote the House for Mr. Biswas, उसकी वो किसने लिखी थी? Naipaul, who won the Nobel Prize. And Naipaul I used to really revere. And he said, your book is as good as Narayan and Naipaul. And he took a lot of names. And I said, Faiz Sahab, ये तो blasphemy है. ये तो बहुत बड़े writers. He said, no, your book is as good as that, So I said, what do you mean by first-class writers? Shakespeare, Milton. I said, thank you very much. Putting me in the second class is an honor. And then he sat for a long time and we chatted, And he became a friend. फिर मैं रशिया गई थी, वहाँ मिले थे 2-3 दफा, And बस वो हालात थे. I was always in Lahore. And I migrated to Bombay, where my husband belonged, where the whole Parsi community is based. So that was a charming experience for me to be, for the first time, to be embedded in my community and to get to know Parsis. And I think a lot of what I learned there went into the Crow Eaters. I realized what a nutty, funny community we are. Not that we are not nutty in Pakistan too, but we are very few.
So this was an excerpt from an interview that we had done with Bapsi Sidhwa in the year 2016. And because we were reading the book, The Crow Eaters, I thought it would be wonderful if I share this particular part in which she spoke about what prompted her to write the book, what kind of information and inspiration she took from her own community, from her own experiences, what went behind the scenes of writing this book. And the one thing that when I went and spoke with Ms. Sidhwa, that I found most inspiring was the fact that, she never went to school. She had polio as a child, so she was home taught. She went into college much later, and she wrote because it was a sort of expression, and it was her way of communicating with the world at large. She was greatly inspired. She was greatly encouraged by wanting to do this on behalf of what she had experienced as a child. And when she had written the book, she was so nervous, and she told us this, that she had sent the book to a few publishers in Pakistan, and nobody wanted to publish this book because they said, the Parsi community is so small in number in Pakistan that who's going to buy this book? And it was through encouragement from literary giants like Faiz Ahmed Faiz, which kind of made her believe in herself, and she got the book published and it went out in the market. It was greatly appreciated. And then, so many years down the lane, we are still reading her book. So it is a testament to her belief in herself, her encouragement that she got from the environment around her. And above all, that deep inner confidence that you have that whatever it is that you want to talk about or what you want to say is worth being said, because it is in your head, and now from your head it has come down on paper. So that was the thing about The Crow Eaters that Bapsi Sidhwa had to say. I hope that answers your question, but if you have any more details that you'd like to ask off that have stemmed from the interview that I shared, I'd be happy to answer those. Peshawar?
No, we don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm giving you a quick update for Afghanistan. Unfortunately, there has been a power breakdown in Afghanistan and they are not able to connect. They are really trying their level best to see if they can come up with a backup generator to log in. And as soon as their issue is resolved, they'll be back on. Unfortunately, living in third world countries, these are things that we have to encounter all the time. But I'm so glad that Peshawar was able to log in. We had a session with Swat in the morning as well, and Swat had really heavy rainfall, really heavy snowfall last night. So even their internet was troubled, but they were able to connect and get on board. I'm hoping that our friends from Afghanistan will be joining in soon and will be able to tell us their opinions and ideas from the book. All right, so there are lots of little subcategories that come out from The Crow Eaters. One of them is something that is very close and dear to my heart, which is minorities. In Pakistan, we do have minorities, but we as Muslim majorities don't really dwell much into it. We are not really very aware of what their lives are like, living as minorities in our country. So important to be read because it kind of gives us a window into their lives, into their thought processes, into their ups and downs. Another very interesting angle that The Crow Eaters also covers is the partition and the displacement of people across the borders. She talks about how her friends how her neighbors who were Sikhs and Hindus in the 1947 in Pakistan suddenly were no longer there, and these new people came in from across India and integrated into the Pakistani diaspora, how they changed Lahore, how she was sitting at that time in Lahore and how it affected and influenced her. So these were some of the things that we get to read about in the book. So, Peshawar, now what I would also like to know is, while you were reading the book, was there any passage in the book that really resonated with you? And if you would like to share that with us. Peshawar, over to you.
We just need a moment. All right, thank you.
Okay, while you gather your thoughts, let's go to Aruj and ask her. Aruj, when you were reading the book, there were many subcategories that stem out from the book itself. As we discuss the book, why don't you share with the audience some of the categories that you think that come from the book should definitely be discussed as part of this book club?
I think for one thing, what I'd really love is the sort of, so if there, I'm guessing from our conversation that there is no member of the Parsi community in this book club. So as someone who is also not from the Parsi community, what I related to was this pattern of being in a place that is familiar, that is supposed to be yours, in inverted commas, and being displaced from it, and the feeling that that has, and what you want to keep with you when you are in, you know, otherwise uncharted territory. And that was what I loved. I loved how the mother-in-law Jerbano reacted to that, which was a very sharp, very aggressive protest against being displaced in Lahore. And then I also liked the, you know, opposition of that as Freddie, who was like, I'm all for, you know, I'm all for gelling, and I'm all for becoming friends with all these Lahoris, with learning Punjabi, speaking in, you know, the dialect and all of those things. And then there was his wife and his mother-in-law's daughter, who was somewhere in the middle, who was like, I really couldn't care less, I'm just going to go with the flow. That was a pattern that I loved, in which, you know, they're constantly talking about the Tower of Silence in Karachi, for example, and how that's where the mother-in-law wants to be buried, and that they will have to they have these long dining room conversations about how she would want to be buried there, and the way she would want to be buried there. It's very not buried there, pardon, to have her funeral performed in the Tower of Silence in Karachi. Otherwise she will not be able to go back to her ancestors in the afterlife. And it's so interesting how it is supposed to be a morbid conversation, but it just ends up being a fact, a very important fact of life, which they have to discuss while having dinner. And yeah, so that was just something that I wanted to maybe touch upon as well. If this was something that you, as someone who is not Parsi, by you I mean everyone here, um, can relate to, can somehow, you know, connect to in their life, in some way that they've, you know, in the way that they've grown up and the way that they've negotiated with the world around them. Yeah, that was something that I found fascinating in the book.
So I have a very interesting question, I think, for Peshawar. Peshawar, the book talks about displacement to certain degrees. It talks about moving from something that is familiar to you, that you're comfortable with, to a new area, which where there are things which are familiar, but it isn't your own. And you do worry, when my life comes to an end, what's going to happen to me, where I'm going to go. So Peshawar has seen a large insurgence of refugees coming in from Afghanistan. And these refugees have had to settle into Peshawar and find space for themselves. And even though they have tried to integrate into the society, the elders from the Afghan community have always spoken of Afghanistan, which was very different, where they grew up, where how one day they would want to go back. Is it something that you have experienced in your interactions? Have you had many interactions with the Afghan community in Peshawar? And if you could maybe talk to us about that.
Yes, we need a moment, please.
Okay. So, Ruj, another thing about the book that I had found most fascinating was the Parsis' obsession with getting together and eating. Like everything in the book somehow or the other comes round to getting ready for a party where there is food. There are these conversations that are being held around parties where there is food being served. There are these, like Babsi talks about how in Bombay she every evening gets her kids ready to go to the club where she meets all these other Parsis where they sit together around food. So it seems like everything that is related to their entertainment is centered around food. So like reading the book, are there any parts of the book which you kind of gives you a glimpse into the kind of food that the Parsis enjoy? And what is that one thing, like, the British have their tea. So what is that one thing that the Parsis always have to have? Otherwise their get together is like completely incomplete.
Well, from the book, it was fine pork. They had to have pork in every dinner. I'm sorry, there's a bit of a disturbance.
We have.
Oh, I think our friends from Afghanistan are joining.
No, they haven't been able to. They're trying. I don't know. They're having severe technical issues. They're messaging me that they're trying.
There's this person who's joined in from an account called Faisal Khan.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a student who would like to share some thoughts.
All right.
She has a passage that she resonates with.
My name is Shweta. This there are hardly 120,000 Parsis in the world, and still we maintain our identity. Why? Booted out of Persia at the time of the Arab invasion, 1,300 years ago, a handful of our ancestors fled to India with their scared trade fires. Here they were granted
Sanctuary
by the Prince Yadav Rana on condition that they did not eat beef, wear sandals, or convert the susceptible masses. Our ancestors were not too proud to bow to his will. I relate to this because I am a Christian, and we are a minority, but we have our own identity. We are proud of we were first Hindu, untouchables, but become Christians.
So much for sharing that with us. I completely understand how you must have felt when you read the book, because like the Parsis, the Christians are also a minority in our country, and I hope you got the same feeling that I had gotten when I read the book. And I remember when I was speaking to Babsi, at that time also we spoke about read about a minority in a majority country. When you read about it, you do realize that there are so many unique elements to that. And I love the fact that Babsi took everything that she as a minority felt and owned it and turned it into her story, from the way people were jesting her to the bullying that she was getting to the craziness that was part of her minority community. And she took it as a life lesson into making it something that she could be proud of. And I feel like I hope you read the book and you got the same. So, my question to you is, when you were reading the book, and as a minority reading the book, what were the parts of the book that you connected with personally?
There was actually a connection problem. Can you please repeat the question?
I just wanted to know, as a minority, when you were reading about Bapsi's story, what were the elements that she spoke about that you connected with as a minority as well?
Can she speak in Urdu?
You'll have to unmute, please. I think we have Afghanistan on board as well. Nishan, oh, sorry. Afghanistan, we can do a quick tech check with you if you're online. We can check your audio and video if you would switch it on, and we can take you in the conversation.
Hello. Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but your screen is tilted. So if you could just rotate it 90 degrees.
Is it okay now?
Yes, perfect.
I'm sorry because due to electricity problems, and there is a problem today with the connection also. So many of our friends left for their works, and they thought that we wouldn't make it today. Here is me and my friends. So I hope it's okay for you.
No, that's fine. We
couldn't do it.
All right. So basically, we were discussing Babsi's book, The Crow Eaters. Between ourselves, we have our friends in Peshawar who were talking about the book, and we were sharing it. We were sharing some thoughts. Before we go further in, is there something about the book that you'd like to speak to us about?
Yeah, to be honest, actually, the one who is responsible for the BCAB program here in Nangarhar, the guy with actually he's my friend Suleiman Safe. He went to Mazar Sharif Promise due to some problems. Like I think he got a job there. I don't know, but he was there for last days. So he didn't make to give us the books, and I personally don't have the book. I texted him many times, but he said that I'm busy, like I can't make to give it to you. So today we are here just to hear from you and derive new ideas from you. So today you can accept your audience.
All right, wonderful. So I'll ask my friend Aruj to give you a quick summary of what the book is about, and then we can carry on the conversation from there.
Hi, hello, Mr. Zia. It's really nice to meet you. My name is Aruj. The book is basically centered around the Parsi community, which is a religious minority located in India and Pakistan both. The book shows a Parsi family, the Jangalwala family, which is the person himself, Freddy, his wife, Putli, his mother-in-law, Jerbano, And it shows them traveling from Karachi, which is a hub of the Parsi community in Pakistan, traveling from there to Lahore. However, the book is based before Pakistan and India were divided. So it is based in British India during colonial rule. And the book starts with these people moving to Lahore, where there are hardly any Parsi families around. And that is a huge point of contention between Freddie and his mother in law. So it shows very, very comical, very, very vividly hilarious sequences of the two of them bickering, of Freddie trying to go to some mystic to get some, sort of magical potions and things to sort of overpower her. And then comedy ensues as a result of that. And so the book is about coming to terms with moving, with changing your locations, with going out of your comfort zone, and at the same time trying to retain that identity while living a family life, while earning money, while trying to make friends, trying to socialize within a larger context, which isn't your community, so to speak. So that's what the book is about in a gist. Yeah, back to Peshawar. I think they have a question.
Hi, yes, you asked a question about if anyone had any similar experiences. So one of our students here has an experience to share that helped them resonate with the book more.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Naila Khana. So I moved to Peshawar, Waziristan in 2008, which was very scary for me. It took me time to settle, and I reading this book helped me understand that I was not alone as a minority. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for those lovely words. It's always encouraging to know people's story, to learn from it, and to, as we move into our lives, as we grow every day, we learn from each other. And it is these shared experiences that enhance our existence as human beings. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so now I have something that I want us all to think over and then have a conversation on. And it is to come to terms with two things. One is displacement, and the other is minorities and the rights of minorities. I want to know from my friends in Peshawar what they think we mean when we say minorities and their rights. What does this term mean? And then I'll move to my friends in Afghanistan and ask them what they think are the rights of minorities and what does it mean to them. Then Kahina, I'd also like to come to you and ask you, as a foreigner living in Pakistan, how do you think Pakistan, where it is in terms of rights of minorities, and as an American, where there are so many different communities that live together, that live in an integrated system, a secular system, how do you think coming together as a community with different ethnicities, how does that feed into a more progressive nation? So Peshawar, first to you, then Afghanistan, then Kahina, you. So Peshawar, over to you. All right, while Peshawar prepares their answer, let's move to Afghanistan. Afghanistan, can you tell me what do you think it means to be a minority? And what do we mean when we say rights of minorities? You're muted, you'll need to unmute, please.
I said that, let me be honest with you, because I can't exaggerate and I can't just provide facts. Actually, I have been, my first 5 years were in Pakistan. I studied there to 3rd grade in Nangarhar, the best side, Peshawar. So there, like, we were living there as refugees, and we consider ourselves as minority. So the problem there with the people, was not in the people, but actually the problem was in the like with the army, with the soldiers. They always provided like a negative perspective of the refugees to those to the nations of Pakistan about the refugees, about us. So we wanted to live as normal life as the other Pakistanis and our neighbors living there, but we were not allowed that. So like we were not a minority, we were refugees there. But as there is the subject today is minority, I think wherever the refugees live or minority live, they have to give the same right as other nations. We don't have to call them minority actually. The minority itself sometimes provides a negative message. Right now I'm besides the Gurdwara, which is the place of Sikhs, the Sikh people, and right now. So if like this is a small area right now, so these people are protected more than the other people, other ones who are living in Nangarhar. And as I was coming 10 or 30 minutes before, they were guarded there, security forces were there. The situation is not as bad, but still were protected because the government wanted to give them the privilege of security and the privilege that this is that is their own country. I actually long before I was reading a report by Afghanistan Times. They wrote that in 2000 from 2000 to 2015 or 18, almost 80,000 Sikh community, the minority live in Afghanistan. But due to the war and the security problems, they went back to Hindustan, and they took back their nationalities there and started to start a normal life there. But the government concerned the government. The government thought that if we lose the privilege of saving the minority, so we are not a government. So as I said recently, if the government want to save the rights of minority, they can. The people cannot, because the minority is a small group. They cannot protect themselves. Like they don't have enough power. I'm sure the rights of human have the power. The right to speech has the power. Social media has the power, but they're not, due to their low population, they are not as empowered as other people. So that's the job of the government. Like if they provide and other people help the minorities so they can achieve their rights, they can live normal life, and they can achieve both mental peace and physical peace. So that's it.
Thank you so much for that. I completely agree. In societies where we feel that there are pressures or there are crises where our minorities are endangered or are vulnerable, then as a society, it falls upon us to ensure that our minorities are protected, because there are neighbors, there are friends, there are our countrymen. And once we understand that when together we come, the stronger we become, then we will always be able to form systems which feed into individual rights. So if we want to come together as a nation, we have to understand that what is applicable and needed for the majority is also needed for the minorities, and stop separating people as minorities and majorities and start treating them as countrymen. So once that thought comes into our mind, it is very important that we do that. So Kahina would like to give her thoughts next, and then we will move on to Peshawar. So Kahina, over to you.
Thank you so much, and I'm very, very happy to have an opportunity to talk about this topic. As you mentioned, the United States it's a multi-ethnic, multiracial society, and it is a government that was founded to be secular. We have separation between religion and government. But that doesn't mean that we don't have minorities. I, in fact, am from a minority group. My mother is African American and my father was white. So I grew up in a group of people that had a history of dealing with the challenges of being minorities, of discrimination, of not having equal opportunity. And I think that what you were just saying and what our friends in Afghanistan have shared is really the way towards a better future for all communities, which is to recognize one another as equals and as individuals. And that is something that has been a common theme in the United States, and it's something that we continue to try to perfect. It's not that we're at the point where everyone is equal all the time, but we do have a very common idea that we should all have those equal rights, and that is something that as a country we work very hard towards. As an American living in Pakistan, it's been very interesting for me because the minority groups in Pakistan are very different than the minority groups in the United States, and yet those issues and those problems are very much the same. And so I'm very glad to be part of this conversation today, because I think part of the way that we achieve those equal rights is by having these conversations and being open to hearing about minority experiences. So thank you. Aliyah, I think you're on mute still.
Moving on to Peshawar, I'd like to get their input on what they think minorities mean, and what do we mean when we say minority rights, and how do we as Pakistanis deal with our minorities? Peshawar, over to you.
I do believe minorities deserve their due rights as before anything else. We are all humans, no matter our race or religion. We are brothers and sisters.
Thank you so much for that. I completely agree that we are equal in the eyes of the law, regardless of our ethnicity, the color of our skin, or our or our political lineage, or our political commitments, or whatever, because as a state, we should all be treated equally, and we should be protected equally, and we should be given a right to freedom to say what we please in a country if we call ourselves independent. So Peshawar has something else that I'd like to add on, yes?
I think something that even Afghanistan can resonate with is the fact that as Pakhtuns, we have a very strong ego. We're intolerant of other minorities, and that's something we as a nation need to overcome. Not just Pakistan, but I consider the Afghan Pakhtuns and the NW Pakhtuns as one nation, as they say, Lar Obar Yo Pakhtun, which means east or west, one Pakhtun. So it's something that we need to overcome as responsible citizens, and we need to eliminate the superiority complex that we have. Being proud of your identity is one thing, but superiority complex and bigotry, intolerance is another thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those thoughts. Afghanistan, would you like to add on to it? I love this angle of the Pakhtun, Pakhtun connectivity. And I remember I was reading this report, where we talked about the block theory, in which they talked about the egalitarian system that exists between the Pakhtuns, in which they all, no Pakhtun is superior to another because they all consider each other equal, but they do not look at others in that same equality block. So Afghanistan, what is your take on that?
Actually, this is a fact that Pakhtuns are so tied to their culture and their tradition, but there are problems in our culture, but the Pashtuns are that controlled by their ego that they can't realize those problems. A month ago, I was watching a speech of President Ashraf Ghani with the TikToks, one of the staff members of the TikToks, So our president started the conversation by saying that Afghans, we can go to hell if you invite us so calmly, but we can go even to heaven paradise or heaven by force. So I was shocked at that time. I wondered like this can be the president, like a president can talk like this. So it is a fact. If our president can climb this, that our ego is and superiority is that high that we can go to heaven by force. Like we don't have to go to, like, everything that is done violently by forces and must be prevented. Like looking at that example, if there is something fun and entertainment in the heaven, we have to go there, even if it's by force or by whatever. So there is a fact, as our friend from Peshawar said, that we are all controlled by ego. This is a major problem of all Pashtunistan and Pushtun people. But we are trying through these conversations and live webinars and discussing such a kind of subtopics. I hope we get through these problems and one day we find an overall solution to all of them.
Thank you so much for that. I think there is nothing in this world that cannot be solved if we are committed to finding a solution. I also believe that conversations like this, especially candid conversations in which we don't have to censor what we think, gives us room for tolerance, and it breeds better values amongst us, to be able to listen to others, to be able to absorb different ideas. Because just because an idea does not resonate with us does not mean that it is wrong. It just means that it might not be the right idea for us. And there is no harm in that. But I also think that rejecting ideas without ever thinking about them is also something that actually hinders our growth. So like I said in this book, when Bapsi talks about her life and her community, it is a window into different people who all come together to make the larger diaspora of Pakistan. So if we call ourselves Pakistani today, we must know what are the different people who live here, who might not be like us, but are still a part of us. And this is one of the reasons that we wanted to keep this book as part of the reading list. And another reason that we really wanted Afghanistan to also read this book was two-tier. Number one, of course, it was because we wanted our Afghan brothers to know more about our communities, the different ethnicities that live in Pakistan. Pakistan is not just Peshawar and Quetta, where they have Pathans who they have more in common with. But we are a country where we have Sikhs, we have Hindus, we have Parsis, we have Muslims, and we all come together, and we are not where we would ideally like to be. But if we start having these conversations, then very soon we can be where we ideally hope to reach one day, which is a more tolerant and a more encompassing country. And I have the same desire for Afghanistan, because it is not only our bordering neighbor, but it is also a country with which we have decades and centuries of history together. So it is only by getting to know more about each other, in getting interested in each other's cultures, in our present, our past, and our future, that we can build a stronger community of humans from the region. So hence, that is one of the most important reasons that we feel that these conversations are important. I also understand that most of my friends in Pakistan and Afghanistan struggle with language. I just want to tell you this, that never let language be a barrier. If you have a thought that you'd like to moderate, and your moderators can translate and put it as part of the conversation. We are all here to help you. Myself and Arud speak very good Urdu. So if you want to speak in Urdu, we would be more than happy to translate it for our Afghan partners. And I mean, just on that thought, I would like to thank each and every one of you for being here. And a little thing that I want all of us to mull over as we sign off for today and get ready to meet again in a month is, how do we treat our minorities? How much do we know about our minority? How are they treated? What are the problems that they are facing? And let's come back together next month, and talk about how we can help them. Let's create small platforms, and then we can build on those platforms to become large enough to be able to create an impact. But you see, every journey starts with a single step. And
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I do have to go, but I really am so impressed with the conversation that you all had today. I really appreciated hearing from the group in Peshawar and from the community in Afghanistan. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I very much hope that I'll get to participate again. Sure. So thank you, and I'll say goodbye now.
Peshawar, are there any last thoughts that you'd like to have before we close the session?
We would like to thank all of you for being here today and being part of this conversation. It was definitely very eye-opening for us to interact with the Afghan community, because most of us are even living with the Afghan refugees in Pakistan as well, but we all were very excited to interact with the Afghan community. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure having you. Afghanistan, would you like to say something before we sign off?
Actually, as we have seen in the previous session, our friends were so quiet, but ma'am, you were support and motivation gave them that today they are speaking to us, and I'm very happy for that. So I would like, as we have said, we have formed a family. After now, we are a family, and we will get us to each other as a family. So I would like to have a few words in Urdu and Pashto. If تاسو ټول نه ډېره زیاته مننه موږ ټول یو سره ان شاء الله په دې موضوع به سره بحث کوو د خیره او شکریہ.
Thank you so much. Okay, everybody, that is us signing off, and till we meet again, goodbye.